What's up guys, Berserker here, and today I want to try something a little bit different. Today I want to talk about Ghost Recon and potentially an idea about it. This idea I'm sure other people have had, but this is coming purely from my perspective, and I'm going to try to draw it out for you the best I can in this video. So if you've seen any of the other small amount of videos that I have on my channel, I really like history, but more specifically, I like the Vietnam War, and that's what I want to talk about today. What if we could get a Ghost Recon set in the Vietnam War? I personally think that game would be awesome, and to me, personally, I think it fits the whole recon setting of the game very well. And for you history buffs out there, you would know for the majority, if not the entirety of the Vietnam War, that recon teams from all branches and armies were being used in a very high degree. So with all that being said, allow me to map out my interpretation of the Ghost Recon game in the Vietnam War. Okay, so obviously Vietnam is a very jungle-rich environment, and with this little bit of gameplay of Ghost Recon Wildlands, I believe that the jungle setting in this game would be a good enough scenery, if you will, for a Vietnam War set map. Now we all know how big Ghost Recon maps are, and I believe they could fit the entirety of Southeast Asia into a map if they really wanted to. But for the sake of the game, I would say do the entirety of South Vietnam, the DMZ, North Vietnam, and all along the Ho Chi Minh Trail into Cambodia and Laos. I also believe they should put in landmarks like this, the rock pile. The rock pile is located just south of the DMZ and was a US observation. This is what something on top of the rock pile would have looked like during the time of the war, and something else like the Khe Sanh combat base for the Marine Corps. In 1968, this combat base would come under a 77-day straight bombardment from artillery, mortars, rockets from the NVA. And that's just a very broad stroke of my idea of what the map would be if they were to make this game. Now for the setting, I think the setting should be in 1968 during the Tet Offensive, for that's when the NVA and the Viet Cong were very active and was truly one of the higher points of the Vietnam War, if not the highest. The Tet Offensive took place on January 20th and lasted till September 23rd of 1968. This was when the North Vietnamese Army and the Communist Viet Cong groups had coordinated attacks on a multitude of US, British, Australian, and South Vietnamese combat units located throughout the entirety of South Vietnam. So I think that would be a near perfect setting for a Vietnam-based Ghost Recon game. Now for the units, I think they should do like they did in Ghost Recon Wildlands and use like the blur of the colors, but instead of using orange for Sicarios and purple for Unidad, do like red for NVA and yellow for Viet Cong. Here's a little illustration of what the Viet Cong could look like, who were basically the common folk, the farmers, just common people who aligned with the Communist Party's ideologies. These guys were your guerrilla war fighters, the ones who did the hit and run tactics, the ones who made improvised explosive devices and booby traps, and they typically had older weapons. Next you have your NVA, who are typically your better trained, more battle hardened individuals, and these guys came directly from the communist north. They had better weapons and they were not afraid to stay and fight, with most often of times being they would fight to the death. Next up, we have our ARVN. The ARVN were the South Vietnamese people who wanted to help the United States and NATO fight against the Communist North. So these are the guys that trained with the United States Armed Forces. They were also put into special recon units like the MACV SOG, or SOG for short. So essentially, these guys would be the rebels from Ghost Recon Wildlands. These are your friends that you can call support and they come help. They are native to the area. Finally, we have the NATO forces, or for the most part, the United States military. There were other people who did fight in the Vietnam War, such as the Australians and the British, but there were few Australian units and even fewer British units. But obviously, everybody had their role to play. And for the American forces, for the United States Army, you had Special Forces, you had Green Berets, you had the Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol, or the LRRPs, the Air CAF, a bunch of different Army guys that goes on forever. And then this is where my bias comes out. For being a Marine, you have the United States Marine Corps. So you have the regular Marine Corps infantry, you have recon teams, you have force reconnaissance teams. For the Marine Corps, they mainly operated to the northern sector of South Vietnam, but still to the south of the DMZ. But there were still operations in the DMZ and in Cambodia and Laos with the Recon Marines. Then you also had the Navy, everybody loves Navy SEALs. You had the Navy guys who did the patrol boats, the PBR boats. Then you have the Air Force who supported both special operations and conventional units. Now, in like all Ghost Recon games, there are a multitude of vehicles, but this being the 60s, there's probably not as many. However, there are quite a few that we could still use. Here is a M151 Jeep. It can be outfitted with a M60, a 30 cal, or a 50 cal. Next is the M54 gun truck. These trucks were typically modified by individuals to be more up armored and obviously have a ton of guns on them. You could do 50 cals, 30 cals, M60s, M134 miniguns. They had it all. Next are the helicopters. You could use the CH-34 with one door gunner, either being an M60 or a 30 cal. Next is the UH-1 Hueys, or the Slicks, with an M60 on each door for a door gunner. Up next is the OH-6 Cayuse, which typically had one door gunner and maybe a mounted minigun on the side, and the AH-1 Cobra, which typically had rocket pods, miniguns, and a 40mm grenade launching turret. Next up is the CH-47 Chinook. I would just put two door gunners on each side up by the cockpit, and then one door gunner in the back on the ramp. Then there's the CH-47 gunship Guns A Go-Go, and these were decked out with 50 cals, rockets, a 40mm grenade launching turret. This thing's sole purpose was to obliterate anything around, behind, or in front of it, so it was a beast of a machine. Next up is the PBR, and that would be cool to have a mission going down a river or whatever, you and your homeboys in a PBR, just lighting up the tree line because Charlie don't surf. And finally, for the Americans, is the M48 Patton main battle tank. I know in other Ghost Recon games, they haven't put in a drivable tank. Maybe a few APCs, but not really like a tank. If they put it in, cool. If they didn't, it probably wouldn't be that big of a loss. If they didn't want to put in the main battle tank, they could put in the M113 APC. This was commonly used amongst a lot of troops. The NVA often did capture these and turn them against the American forces as well. So it would just be a good filler vehicle for both the Americans and the North Vietnamese army. Now, for both the Viet Cong and NVA, you could use a variety of these vehicles I'm going to show you, and these first couple vehicles being readily available to most civilians. And the bicycles could be used by the Viet Cong, like shown here. They are used to transport all sorts of weapons. The NVA also had cars of their own for staff NCOs and officers. They also drove around on motorcycles. They had troop transports that they could outfit with a Dishka if they wished, and a multitude of APCs and main battle tanks. Now we're just going to get into the clothes for a second. For the US troops and the Australian forces and everybody, OD green, long pants, shirts, rolled up, cutoffs, whatever. They mixed and matched a lot. The Viet Cong, most time Viet Congs are generally identified by the black pajamas, but there were more than just black pajamas. And then the North Vietnamese army most commonly had green and like a tan colored utility. Now, like I was saying, there are a lot of different variations of uniforms. You have the tiger stripe, you have the EDRL patterns, you have just the flat green. You have all these different uniforms and patterns that you can dive into and like put into the game. I think they should also, when it comes to the customization, they should make it like Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Breakpoint had a lot of good customization options. It would allow you to customize your character to look a certain way that you wanted them to look. So with that being said, put in t-shirts and then put in a t-shirt with the sleeves cut off, or put in the utilities and then you do a utility with the sleeve rolled up like a quarter way or halfway or 3/4 of the way or completely cut off. The same thing goes with the trousers. Do bloused boots, unbloused boots, torn pants, muddy pants, bloody pants. And then for like the headgear, like patrol caps, me being a Marine, 8-point covers. Give us bandanas, do-rags, boonie covers. And let us customize all these things with different patterns. Like here we have the tiger stripe, we have the frog pattern, we have the ERDL pattern, and then we have the spray pattern where people would take their olive drab or OD green utilities and try to make a mock tiger stripe by spray painting them with black line. And for all that is like good and holy, don't just make one style when it comes to like the boonie caps. And during the Vietnam War, people wore their boonie covers in so many different styles. Like, give us multiple styles, not just the brand new out the box flat cap all the way across the whole brim. Also, the NVA and the Viet Cong both wore boonie caps as well, so it shouldn't just be helmets and straw hats. They wore bandanas, boonies, yes, they did wear straw hats, but they also wore helmets a lot as well. I'm also not going to go into like patches because I know Ubisoft has its own like little realm, but if they could do historical patches, that would be kind of cool. And for the gear, there's like an infinite amount of ways you can wear Alice gear. So, look at historical pictures and maybe let us be able to customize the way we wear the stuff on our Alice gear, or give us just multiple different types of Alice gear to wear. Not just generic suspenders, ammo pouches, and like a grenade, because troops were decked out when they were going into the field. They were carrying all this ammo, all these ordnances, radios. They had all kind of stuff they took with them when they went out into the field. And the same can be said for the flak jackets. People wore their flak jackets totally different ways. They drew on them, and then they wore Alice gear over them or just ammo belts. And so many different ways to customize a flak jacket. And just for the sake, if there was a game made and it was set in, say, 1968 during the Tet Offensive, the Army would use the M69 flak jacket, and the Marine Corps would use the M1955 flak jacket. And like I said, make multiple different styles of Alice gears, or multiple different styles of flak jackets, helmets, uniforms, so we can customize and portray the image that we want to portray if we were in the Vietnam War. Or implement a system where We have our Alice gear, or our pack, or our helmet, or our flak and whatever, and we can put grenades where we want to put them. We can put canteen pouches, ammo belts. If we want smoke grenades hanging off, machetes hanging off our pack, law rockets, all different kind of stuff, because that's what would make the game more immersive and more realistic. And the same goes for the helmets and the flak, like they drew on their helmets a lot and they drew on their flaks, maybe make like a emblem creator type of thing and we could place what we write, or get a select, a bunch of different stickers and sayings, and you know what I'm saying, like let us be creative and express ourselves if we were in the Vietnam War. And finally, onto the weapons. The weapons I see get mixed up a lot. People make a Vietnam mission in a game that's not Vietnam based and they'll put an M16A2. No, put an M16A1 and let us choose 18 round mags, 30 round mags, dual 18 round mags, taped up together. All different kind of stuff we could do. Bayonets, put in a bayonet thrust feature. The M60 is another big one. No M60 Echo 2s or Echo 4s. Put in the Echo 1. Put in the M60 that was used during Vietnam. And I know Ubisoft can do this because in Far Cry 5 they made a Vietnam DLC that was pretty good. They had the M16, they had the M60, they had the M14, the M40, they had all the guns, they looked right. So they can definitely do this. They can definitely pull this off. But anyway, here are some weapons used by the Viet Cong and NVA. You got the Mosin Nagant 9130, the M44, the AKM, Type 56, RPG-7s, BP-27s, RPD, PPSHs, MP-40s, MAP-49s, Tokarevs, Makarovs, Mausers, all different kind of stuff you could give, and a bunch of weapons just for one faction. And then for the US, we have the M16, we have the Car 15, the M1 carbine, the M2 carbine, the grease gun, the Swedish K, the M14, the M60, the Stoner, the Law, Willie Pete grenades. I mean, you got so much stuff you can do, and especially if you're doing like a clandestine type of game, like a Ghost Recon game. There are so many different small arms used in the Vietnam War. And there were a handful of weapons during the Vietnam War that were capable of having a suppressor mounted to them or a scope of some sort. So it's not like it would be a boring game. Like there's a lot that you could still do and feel semi-modern without going back to just pure iron sights. And so, with all that being said, I really hope that this is something that a lot of you also would like to see potentially in the future if this video were to get recognized by Ubisoft. I really do enjoy history. Like, I'm not like a crazy history buff, but I love it just enough that it fascinates me. But more specifically, the Vietnam War, just because it takes place during the 60s. I love the cars that were being driven, the music that was being played, the advancement in technology when it comes to firearms or methods of travel, like the UH-1 Huey. Like it's just a cool time period that I find interesting. But I'm also pitching this idea just because I really hate the fact that the only real legitimate Vietnam games that they have are all on PC, and not everybody owns a PC or a gaming laptop or whatever, and not everybody wants to have to buy a PC to be put into that atmosphere or to experience that type of, part in history. And then there's most days where I don't want to jump on my PC, I want to play my console. So this is really an idea that's being pitched for console players who want a Vietnam War game, and I think Ghost Recon would be the absolute best game or template of a game that a developer could make a Vietnam War setting. But with all that being said, please let me know, like, if you have any ideas that I could, potentially make a part two of. That's like, I forgot to mention it earlier in the video, but like when you could call in the rebel support in Wildlands, that would be cool. You could call in like a napalm strike or white phosphorus from an artillery battery. And then all in all, it would just be a fun co-op game to play with your friends because for the most part for console, there's not a game like that out there. But if you agree with me and you like everything that I showed you and had to say, please just like and share the video. I mean, you don't need to comment, you don't need to subscribe to my channel. This could be the first and last video you ever watch. I just want to know that I'm not the only one that wants something like this to happen. But with all of that out of the way now, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I will catch you in the next one.